I discovered my wife was cheating when she died in a car accident, and her secret lover showed up at the funeral claiming to be her fiance with flowers reading to my future wife. I'm Dennis, 38, married to Jenna, 35, for 12 years. She worked as a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital, and I'm a senior manager at a logistics company. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Phoenix with our two kids, Tyler and Emma. Jenna had always been dedicated to her patients and often worked double shifts, which I supported completely since she was passionate about healthcare. 6 months ago, Jenna started picking up additional shifts in the emergency department, claiming they were understaffed and offering overtime pay that would help us renovate our kitchen. She'd leave around 6 p.m. twice a week and come home exhausted around 4 a.m., always talking about how demanding the ER was compared to her usual medical floor. Jenna also began taking continuing education courses for trauma nursing certification, attending weekend seminars that required her to stay overnight in downtown Phoenix. She seemed excited about advancing her career and potentially moving into emergency medicine full-time. Over the past few months, Jenna started dressing differently for work, buying more expensive scrubs and getting her hair done professionally before her ER shifts. When I asked about the changes, she said the emergency department had higher standards for professional appearance. Jenna also became more secretive about her phone and work schedule, claiming that ER protocols required confidentiality about patient cases and that discussing her shifts would violate HIPAA regulations. She seemed stressed but energized by her new responsibilities. 3 weeks ago, Jenna mentioned that she was being considered for a permanent ER position that would require relocating to a hospital in Tucson. She seemed excited about the opportunity but claimed the decision process was confidential until official offers were made. Last Tuesday morning, Jenna left early for what she said was a mandatory training session in Tucson, planning to return Wednesday evening. She kissed me goodbye and reminded me to pick up the kids from school, mentioning she'd call when the training finished. Wednesday at 11 p.m., I received a call from the Arizona State Police. Jenna had been killed in a head-on collision with a drunk driver on Highway 10, about 30 miles outside Tucson. The officer said she'd been pronounced dead at the scene. I spent Thursday in shock, making funeral arrangements while trying to explain to Tyler and Emma that their mother wasn't coming home. The logistics of planning a service while grieving and caring for devastated children was overwhelming. Friday morning, I met with the funeral director to finalize details for Saturday's service. Jenna's co-workers from Presbyterian Hospital had sent beautiful flowers, and her family was flying in from Michigan for the ceremony. Saturday afternoon, 20 minutes before the funeral service, a man I'd never seen approached me in the church lobby. He was about my age, well-dressed, and carrying an elaborate floral arrangement with a card attached. He introduced himself as Brandon Martinez and said he was Jenna's fiance, asking why he hadn't been contacted about the funeral arrangements. He seemed genuinely confused about why he'd had to learn about Jenna's death through social media posts from her co-workers. I told Brandon there must be some mistake, that Jenna was my wife and had been for 12 years. Brandon looked equally confused and said Jenna had told him she was divorced, that she'd been single for over a year, and that they'd been planning their wedding for this fall. Brandon pulled out his phone and showed me photos of him and Jenna together. Recent photos, clearly taken within the past few months. Jenna wearing a diamond engagement ring I'd never seen, looking happy and relaxed in ways that seemed different from how she'd been with me lately. The most shocking photo was Jenna and Brandon at what was obviously an engagement party. Jenna was wearing a white dress, holding champagne, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed the party had happened 3 weeks ago, the same weekend she'd claimed to be in Tucson for continuing education. Brandon seemed as shocked as I was and started showing me text messages between him and Jenna, planning their future together, discussing honeymoon destinations, and talking about the house they'd been looking at in Tucson where Brandon apparently lived and worked as a paramedic. According to Brandon, Jenna had been flying to Tucson every weekend for the past 6 months, supposedly for work, but actually to maintain their relationship and plan their wedding. She'd been engaged to both of us simultaneously, planning 2 different futures. The funeral guests were starting to take their seats, and I was standing in the church lobby trying to process that my dead wife had been living a complete double life with someone who believed he was her only serious relationship. Brandon wasn't some casual affair partner. He was someone Jenna had built an entire alternate identity with, someone who believed she was divorced and available, someone who'd been making real plans for marriage and relocation. Brandon showed me the engagement ring Jenna had been wearing in Tucson, a completely different style from her wedding ring. She'd been maintaining 2 separate jewelry sets for 2 separate relationships in 2 different cities. The flowers Brandon had brought read to my future wife and included a card about how much he'd missed planning their October wedding. He'd come to mourn his fiancée, not knowing she was actually someone else's wife. I asked Brandon what Jenna had told him about her work, and he said she was a traveling nurse who worked contracts in different cities, which explained her schedule flexibility and frequent trips between Phoenix and Tucson. Jenna had created an entirely fictional version of herself for Brandon, complete with different relationship history and career details. The woman Brandon thought he was engaged to marry had never actually existed. We ended up sitting together during the funeral service, 2 men who'd both been planning futures with Jenna but had been planning them with completely different versions of the same person. The other guests seemed confused about why there were 2 grieving men in the front row. After the service, Brandon and I went to a coffee shop to compare our relationships with Jenna. The timeline was perfectly coordinated. When Jenna told me she was working ER shifts, she was actually in Tucson with Brandon. When she told Brandon she was on nursing contracts, she was home with me and the kids. Going through Jenna's belongings with Brandon felt like conducting an investigation into someone we both thought we knew but clearly hadn't understood at all. Jenna had been incredibly systematic about maintaining her double life, but now that we knew what to look for, the evidence was everywhere. Jenna had 2 complete sets of everything: clothes, jewelry, makeup, even different perfumes for her different identities. In our bedroom, I found a hidden compartment in her jewelry box containing the engagement ring Brandon had given her, along with photos and mementos from their relationship. Brandon discovered that Jenna had been renting an apartment in Tucson under her maiden name, furnished with belongings that belonged to neither of our relationships. She'd essentially created a third space where she could exist as the version of herself she'd created for him. The financial investigation revealed Jenna had been far more strategic than either of us had realized. She'd been using her legitimate nursing income to fund both relationships, carefully managing expenses so that neither of us would see evidence of costs related to the other life. But the most shocking discovery was that Jenna had been planning to choose between us. We found a notebook where she'd been comparing the practical advantages of each relationship, analyzing which situation offered better long-term prospects for her and the children. Jenna had written detailed pros and cons lists about me versus Brandon, evaluating everything from financial stability to family connections to career advancement opportunities. She'd been treating our relationships like business investments, planning to eventually commit fully to one while eliminating the other. According to her notes, Jenna had been planning to fake her death in one relationship while starting fresh in the other. She'd researched how to disappear legally, create new identification, and begin life somewhere else without ties to her previous identity. Brandon and I realized that Jenna's car accident might have prevented her from executing a plan that would have left one of us believing she was dead while she continued living with the other. The crash had accidentally accomplished what she'd been planning to do intentionally. The discovery that Jenna had been planning to fake her death made us both question everything about our relationships with her. Had she been practicing emotional detachment? Had she been testing how each of us would handle loss and crisis? We decided to handle Jenna's affairs together rather than separately, partly for practical reasons and partly because we were the only 2 people who understood the scope of Jenna's deceptions. Jenna's hospital colleagues had no idea about her Tucson life or her second engagement. To them, she'd been a dedicated nurse with some scheduling quirks, not someone maintaining elaborate fiction across state lines. Brandon and I ended up working together to close Jenna's financial accounts, handle her belongings, and manage the legal complexities of someone who'd been engaged to 2 people simultaneously while married to one. The process of settling Jenna's estate revealed that neither of our relationships with her had been entirely authentic. She'd been performing different versions of herself for each of us, adapting her personality and interests to match what she thought we wanted. 6 months after Jenna's death, Brandon and I had become unlikely friends bonded by our shared experience of discovering we'd both been deceived by the same person. We occasionally met for coffee to process the ongoing revelations about Jenna's double life. Brandon decided to stay in Tucson and eventually started dating someone else, someone who was exactly who she claimed to be and had no interest in maintaining secret identities. He seemed relieved to be in a relationship that existed entirely in one location. I kept the house in Phoenix and focused on raising Tyler and Emma, who were still processing their mother's death without knowing about her secret life. The children deserved to remember Jenna as their loving mother, not as someone who'd been planning to abandon them. The strangest part of grieving Jenna was not knowing which version of her had been real, or if any version had been authentic. The woman I'd mourned at her funeral had been a carefully constructed identity, not the complete person Jenna actually was. Jenna's family struggled with learning about her double life after her death. They'd thought they knew their daughter and sister, but Jenna had been hiding massive parts of her identity and behavior from everyone, not just me and Brandon. A year later, Brandon and I still occasionally discover new aspects of Jenna's deceptions. We found evidence she'd been exploring third relationships in other cities, possibly planning to expand her collection of separate identities and partnerships. Sometimes the most elaborate deceptions end in ways the deceiver never planned for, forcing the truth into the open through circumstances beyond anyone's control. Jenna's funeral had brought together 2 men who'd both been planning futures with her, not knowing those futures had been mutually exclusive in her mind.